Hello everybody and welcome to another incredible episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelate. The link is in the description below along with other places you can find me. Previously on the channel, we discussed the origins of the Galadorian Spaceknights, the most lauded of which was a hero known simply as Rahm. We talked about their war with the shape-shifting alien conquerors known as dire Wraiths, and how after 200 years of fighting his way across the universe, Rahm reached the planet Earth, where he made a number of allies in his quest to rout out the hidden invaders. During this ongoing conflict, back on the planet Galidor, the Galadorian Prime Director attempted to develop a new form of Space Knight that would not require volunteers to surrender their bodies and be transformed into cyborgs. However, this experiment inadvertently resulted in the creation of an evil Space Knight named Mentis, when a dark aspect of the Prime Director's personality secretly inhabited his prototype. Pursuing his own agenda, Mentis mentally enslaved the unstable Space Knight Terminator after secretly saving him from execution. Mentis then transformed Terminator into a mirror image of Rahm, converting his mostly robotic body into a cyborg one using organic material that had been removed from Rahm's original body during his own transformation. After that, Mentis abducted the Prime Director, faking his death so that Terminator, disguised as Rahm, would be installed as the planet's new leader. When last we left off, having experienced visions of his home planet's destruction, Rahm had decided to return to Galidor, little realizing that he had been lured there by Mentis. Soon after arriving, Rahm was confronted by his doppelganger, who continued to convince his followers that he was the genuine article, when Rahm's own energy analyzer confirmed that the Galadorian ruler was indeed a cyborg Space Knight and not a dire Wraith. As a result, the real Rahm was accused of being an imposter and subdued by the Galadorian Angel Elite. Mentis then imprisoned his new captive alongside the Prime Director, however Rahm soon succeeded in freeing them both when the two were left unguarded. They discovered that many Space Knights had been frozen in suspended animation after being similarly lured back to Galidor, but fortunately Rahm's neutralizer was able to free them from this imprisonment. Rahm and his comrades then launched an attack on Mentis and discovered his alliance with their long-standing enemies, the dire Wraiths. In the ensuing clash, Terminator and Rahm's old partner, Starshine, was able to get through to Terminator, helping him shake off Mentis's mental conditioning. Meanwhile, the Prime Director confronted Mentis, sacrificing his own physical form to reabsorb the dark aspect of himself that powered the evil Space Knight. However, they had scarcely dealt with that threat when Galactus, the World Eater, arrived to make a meal of their home. Seeking to save their planet, the Space Knights clashed with Galactus's herald, Tarnax the Tamer, and one of their number, Rainbow, was killed in the ensuing battle. The Prime Director's disembodied consciousness attempted to confront Galactus directly, as did Terminator, but both were struck down and neither survived. In the wake of all this, Rahm made a bargain with the World Eater, offering to show him the way to the Dark Nebula where the dire Wraith homeworld was located, provided he left Galidor unharmed. Galactus agreed, and the Space Knights brought him to Wraith World. However, the Devourer was shocked to find an entire sector of space that was unfit for consumption. Realizing that Rahm had suspected this would be the case, but bound by his word, Galactus returned the Space Knights to where he found them, but as recompense for their duplicity, he transported Galidor and the entire Golden Galaxy to another section of space entirely, leaving them stranded. With no idea how to get home, Starshine used her own abilities to scatter the Space Knights across the universe and continue hunting dire Wraiths with the hope that their quest would eventually bring them to Galidor once again. Having fought beside Rahm during many battles early in the war against the Wraiths, Starshine elected to stay by his side once again and returned with him to Earth. However, in his absence, the town of Clairton, to which he was allied, had been attacked by dire Wraiths who captured and replaced the population. Rahm brought Starshine to the town where she seemingly met his allies, including the local superhero Torpedo and the civilian couple Brandy Clark and Steve Jackson, all of whom had secretly been replaced by dire Wraiths. Meanwhile, the real Clairtonites were discovered by the Mole Man, who found them being held in the mines beneath the town. After being convinced that the Wraiths were a threat to his domain as well, Mole Man helped the townspeople fight back against them, dragging the Wraiths underground one by one and beating them into submission before they could fight back. It wasn't long before Rahm and Starshine investigated what was happening, leading to a brief clash with the Mole Man and his outcasts due to a mutual misunderstanding. The ensuing fight was interrupted by the real Brandy Clark and Steve Jackson, who explained the situation. However, when their Wraith imposters attacked, Starshine leapt in front of a fatal blast meant for Rahm, sacrificing her own life to save his. Dejected by the loss of one of his oldest and closest allies, Rahm left Clairton and came upon an even smaller town, Lucifer Falls, whose only remaining inhabitants, the Brickford family, were stricken with radiation poisoning. Fortunately for them, Rahm's Galadorian technology was able to analyze and neutralize the sickness before it spread too far. The Brickfords claimed that the Incredible Hulk was responsible for their town's downfall, but when Rahm investigated, he came upon a different creature entirely, one that identified himself as Link. Originally, he was a member of an unidentified species of hominid that lived in prehistoric China and shared characteristics with both Neanderthals and modern humans. His simple life as a hunter was interrupted when he was buried by a volcanic eruption, but through some bizarre twist of fate he was preserved in suspended animation for countless millennia, until he was awakened once again by atomic testing in the area. He was found by scientists working for the Chinese military who suspected that he was an undiscovered evolutionary stage between modern man and its ape-like ancestors. However, this so-called missing link soon began to mutate because of the radiation, changing into a crystalline form and becoming superhumanly strong. Fearing they would not be able to contain this creature indefinitely, Chinese officials used sleeping gas to render him unconscious before shipping him to the United States and releasing him on the East Coast. That ultimately led to a confrontation between the missing link and the Incredible Hulk, while the Russian intelligence agent Yuri Brevlov attempted to capture the creature for his own government. Over time, the missing link's radiation levels continued to grow, eventually reaching critical mass and causing him to explode aboard a Russian helicarrier while it was flying over the Appalachian countryside. Astonishingly, however, the Link survived, and his crystalline body reformed, temporarily drained of radioactivity. After that was when he was found by the Brickford family, who took him in and gave him the name Lincoln. Thanks to their hospitality and patience, Link learned to speak English and eventually started working in the Lucifer Falls mines. Although his radiation began to build once again, causing Jimmy Jack Brickford to fall ill. Ironically, Bruce Banner was visiting Lucifer Falls at the time, and so of course this situation resulted in another confrontation with the Hulk. Lincoln eventually realized his own culpability in what was happening, but this conflict resulted in another explosion, dispersing his radiation once again. Meanwhile, the residents of Lucifer Falls believed that the Hulk was at fault and that Lincoln Brickford had been defending them. Furthermore, having lost sight of the Green Goliath, they assumed that he had either perished or been buried underground in the blast. And so when people again began falling ill from Lincoln's gradually increasing radioactivity, they suspected that the Hulk's remains were the source. Lincoln went down into the mines once again, claiming that he would search for the Hulk, but secretly exiling himself underground. What he didn't realize was that his rising temperature was igniting buried gas pockets, allowing radioactive fumes to escape into the town above. Most of the inhabitants of Lucifer Falls fled, after which Rahm came upon the town and met the Brickfords, curing them of their radiation poisoning. In his own investigation, he found Lincoln Brickford hiding underground, and Link attacked, mistakenly believing that Rahm would try to kill him. The ensuing battle caused the entire mine system to collapse, destroying the town of Lucifer Falls in the process. Fortunately, the Brickfords survived, and Rahm ultimately succeeded in permanently neutralizing Lincoln's deadly radiation. As a side effect, Lincoln was also stricken with selective amnesia, forgetting that he was the cause of the town's downfall. Although the Brickfords did eventually learn the truth and reluctantly turned Lincoln over to the authorities. Rahm then returned to Clairton once again, confirming that the area was free from dire Wraith activity. After that, the Space Knight briefly clashed with an alien known as the Metal Master, who, as the name implies, could psionically manipulate metallic substances. Although Rahm's Galadorian armor, being composed of a mix of plandanium and living cells, proved highly resistant to his abilities. Meanwhile, the human dire Wraith hybrid Jimmy Marks returned, his scattered atoms coming back together after his defeat at the hands of Rom and the X-Men, which we talked about in the previous Rom video. Also possessing a mutant X gene, this time Hybrid joined forces with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which at the time was composed of the shapeshifter Mystique, her precognitive wife Destiny, and their adoptive daughter Rogue. This led to a confrontation between Rahm and the Brotherhood, but the three women turned against Hybrid after learning that he plotted to use them as broodmares for his own offspring, and Rogue demonstrated her capacity for heroism in the ensuing battle. With Rogue and Rahm working together, Hybrid was defeated and seemingly killed once again. With that done, Rahm again departed from Clairton to seek out hidden wraiths elsewhere on Earth. Meanwhile, Brandy Clark struggled with the fact that, despite his metal form, she had fallen in love with Rahm. As Rahm continued to have adventures on Earth, he fought alongside other heroes including Namor, the Submariner, Shang-Chi, the Master of Kung Fu, and Dr. Stephen Strange, Master of the Mystic Arts. He defeated a number of dire wraiths, including one who took the form of a literal Pied Piper and attempted to lure scores of children through a portal to the Dark Nebula. Meanwhile, back in Clairton, Brandy Clark visited Starshine's grave, suspecting that the fallen Space Knight had been in love with Rahm as well. She lamented the death of someone who could actually be with Rahm, but then Starshine's spirit appeared before her and passed her power on to Brandy before disappearing once again. In the wake of this, Brandy Clark exhumed Starshine's buried remains and retrieved her now empty cyborg armor. She brought this armor to a closed pharmaceutical laboratory where she was approached by a man calling himself Dr. Dread, who was secretly a Wraith warlock in disguise. As mentioned in an earlier video, while female Wraiths tend to be more naturally gifted in the mystic arts, males still possess the capacity to learn, and some, like Dr. Dread, were notably adept. And so in lieu of Galadorian science, Dread used sorcery to fuse Brandy with the cyborg frame, transforming her into the new Starshine. Steve Jackson and Torpedo attempted to intervene, discovering Dread's Wraith nature in the process, but were too late to stop it from happening, and Dread took control over Brandy's Space Knight form as part of his spell. Meanwhile, after an other-dimensional adventure with Doctor Strange, Rahm's search for the Space Knights brought him to Russia, where he encountered the sentient computer known as Quasimoto. Wishing to regain his humanity, Rahm made a deal with Quasimoto, who offered to use cloning technology to grow Rahm a new body, in exchange for his Galadorian armor. To accomplish this, Quasimoto extracted the biological cells from Rahm's armor and used them to clone a new body, with all the memories of the original. What Rahm didn't know was that Quasimoto had gained this technology through an alliance with the Dire Wraiths, but shortly after inhibiting Rahm's armor, the Twisted Machine turned on his alien allies, banishing them to limbo with Rahm's neutralizer. Ironically, Quasimoto was then attacked by Dr. Dread and the mind-controlled Starshine, who believed that he was Rahm. At the same time, Rahm discovered that the cloning technology used to create his new body was far from adequate, as he quickly began to degrade. In the ensuing battle, Starshine drove Quasimoto's sentient programming from Rahm's armor, and the shock of seemingly killing her beloved allowed her to overcome Dread's mind control. Meanwhile, the decaying clone came upon Dr. Dread and killed him after recognizing his scent as a Dire Wraith. Starshine found the Rahm clone and fled from the Russian authorities, after which the two were aided by a former Soviet agent, the Gremlin, who during this time was considered an enemy of the state. With his genius, the Gremlin restored and returned Rahm's original biological material to his cyborg body, resurrecting the Space Knight once again. The cloned Rahm continued to live for mere moments after that, but before he passed on, he assured his cyborg counterpart that whether he was metal or flesh, he was still alive and capable of love. In exchange for his help, Rahm and Starshine defended the Gremlin against Russian forces like Devastator, as well as an independent team of heroes called the Soviet Super Soldiers. In the conflict with the latter, the two Spaceknights ultimately joined forces with the Soviet Super Soldiers to root out a contingent of Dire Wraiths that were plotting to infiltrate Russia. After dealing with these invaders, the Soviet super soldiers took control of the Dire Wraith citadel and welcomed the Gremlin into their ranks. Now, up to this point, most of the Wraiths that Rahm had encountered on Earth were males with a penchant for science and technology. However, the more dominant and magically adept female Wraiths were growing increasingly impatient with the Psi-Wraiths' progress and elected to take direct control of their activities on Earth. In the wake of this, the Dire Wraith Witches launched a vengeful attack on Rahm's allies in Clairton, opting to kill rather than capture their targets, including Steve Jackson and the local superhero Torpedo. Brandy Clark, now Starshine, was naturally incensed upon learning about this and swore to strike back at the invading Wraiths. Meanwhile, representatives from another shape-shifting alien race, the Skrulls, also came to Clairton in search of the Wraiths. You may recall from previous videos that the Dire Wraiths and the Skrulls share common ancestry, but the two races had been enemies since the Wraiths diverged from them eons prior. The Spaceknights and the Skrulls both fought to cleanse Clairton of Wraiths once again, and while Rahm preferred to banish his foes rather than kill them, Starshine was out for blood, and slaughtered whatever Wraiths she could find. Of course, there was nothing they could do for the Clairtonites who had already lost their lives, and a mass funeral was held for the many victims, garnering national attention. This was all shortly after the Skrull throne world Tarnax IV was consumed by Galactus, and so after defeating the Wraiths in Clairton, the Skrull expedition departed to attend to ongoing issues within their own empire, warning that if the Earth was still infested with Wraiths when they returned, they might well destroy the planet to exterminate them. In the wake of all this, the United States government formally allied with the Spaceknights, as what had been an insidious infiltration of alien invaders erupted into all-out war on American soil, with even more civilians getting caught in the crossfire. Furthermore, upon learning the extent to which the shapeshifters had embedded themselves across the globe, the President of the United States alerted other world leaders, corroborating intelligence and uniting multiple nations in the ongoing conflict. In this effort, Rahm worked closely with General Meriwether Lachlan, who led American military forces in the war against the Wraiths. Nick Fury and the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. were also involved in this affair and fended off a Dire Wraith attack on their helicarrier. The Wraiths attempted to turn humans against each other by transforming civilians into monstrous creatures, initially testing this by poisoning the blood samples at a hospital in Atlanta. They launched a similar attack on the town of Beaver Lake, Ontario, flooding the town with waters infected by a magical taint. These operations were halted by the Spaceknights and their allies, including Rick Jones, the Canadian superhero team Alpha Flight, and the astonishing Ant-Man, but these conflicts were not without casualties. Meanwhile, Hybrid proved incredibly tenacious as he successfully reformed once again, and subsequently lured Rahm and Starshine into a trap. Seeking both to get revenge and to reproduce, he reversed the magical spell that had fused Brandy Clark with the Starshine armor and planned to make the restored woman his mentally enslaved bride. In the ensuing battle, Rahm was aided by Professor Xavier's students, the New Mutants, and in particular Ilyana Rasputin, aka Magic, whose soul sword was able to disrupt Hybrid's magical abilities long enough for Brandy to once again disperse his molecules with Rahm's neutralizer. In the end, Brandy survived this ordeal, much to Rahm's relief, but she lamented the fact that she could no longer fight by his side as Starshine. The ongoing war began to approach a climax when the Wraiths mystically linked the Sol system with the dark nebula's black sun, from which they could draw power as part of a plot to merge the Earth with their home planet, Wraith World. Meanwhile, Rahm met with the mutant inventor Forge, who designed a neutralizer of his own that was capable of robbing the Wraiths of their abilities. However, he was unwilling to mass-produce this device for fear that it could be used to depower innocent superhumans. For context, this wasn't long after the prototype for Forge's neutralizer was used without his approval, robbing the X-Man Storm of her abilities. The one responsible for that incident was government agent Henry Peter Gyrick, who was also involved in the ongoing Wraith War. In the end, Forge agreed to create a single gigantic neo-neutralizer, an orbital weapon that could only be used in conjunction with Rahm's neutralizer, increasing its range to planetary proportions. As this device neared completion, Wraith World was drawn into the solar system and steadily approached the Earth in preparation for the impending world merge. One way or another, the Wraith War was nearing its end, and as it did, legions of dire Wraiths descended upon Rahm. But while Rahm was the only Space Knight on Earth at this time, he was not the only hero, and dozens of superhuman champions came to his aid. The Avengers, the X-Men, the Defenders, the Soviet super soldiers, and other heroes from around the globe rallied to fight side by side in the final battle of the Wraith War. Even those without powers like Rick Jones and Brandy Clark took up arms to join the fight for humanity's survival. While Earth's denizens defended their planet, Rahm made his way to Forge's neo-neutralizer, and, much to the annoyance of Henry Peter Gyrick, who'd hoped to depower the planet's superhuman population, Rahm turned the weapon away from the battlefield and trained his beam on Wraith World itself. In the end, this gambit paid off as the Wraith's home planet was completely eradicated, and because the Dire Wraith's abilities had become mystically intertwined with Wraith World itself, its destruction robbed them not only of their mystical prowess, but their shape-shifting powers as well. No longer able to hide, the remaining Wraiths on Earth were rounded up by the heroes and banished to Limbo. With his mission completed, Rahm declared that he would be leaving the planet, much to Brandy Clark's dismay, and despite his cold metal exterior, she gave him one kiss before he departed, declaring that she would always love him. With his departure, Brandy helped Rick Jones look after a young girl named Cindy Adams, whose parents had been killed by the Dire Wraiths, and the three became something of a found family for a time. Meanwhile, Rahm set out to the stars in search of adventure and his fellow Space Knights. But if you want to know what he found, you'll just have to let me know in the comments. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, then be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!